A billionaire walked into his newly acquired company dressed like a nobody. Security was called. He was insulted, humiliated, dismissed, but he didn't reveal who he was. Instead, he watched, he documented, he let the corrupt leaders expose themselves completely. And 2 weeks later, he walked back in wearing a suit. What happened next was the most satisfying takedown of corporate corruption you'll ever hear. This is the story of Ethan Miles, the billionaire in the hoodie, and it's going to change how you see power, justice, and success forever. You know what's funny about people? We think we're good at seeing things. We walk through life believing our eyes work just fine. But the truth is, most of us are blind. We see clothes before we see character. We see status before we see souls. And sometimes that blindness costs us everything. This is a story about a man who understood that truth better than anyone. His name was Ethan Miles, and on a cold February morning in Seattle, Washington, he was about to prove just how blind the world really was. Picture this, it's barely 7 in the morning. The kind of morning where your breath turns to fog and the sky hasn't quite decided if it wants to be gray or just give up entirely. In downtown Seattle, there's a building that gleams like it's made of money itself. Because in a way, it is. The Northcrest Financial Group headquarters, 40 stories of glass and steel and marble floors, so polished you could see your reflection judging you back. This building doesn't just house a company. It houses power. The kind of power that moves markets, changes lives, and decides who gets to dream and who gets to struggle. Inside those walls, men in $1,000 suits make decisions before most people finish their first cup of coffee. And on this particular morning, someone very unexpected was about to walk through those doors. Ethan Miles stood outside for just a moment, looking up at the building. He was wearing a faded gray hoodie, the kind with a small coffee stain on the sleeve that never quite washed out. His jeans had a rip in one knee. Not the designer kind of rip that costs extra. The real kind. The kind that happens when you actually live in your clothes. His sneakers had seen better days, probably better years. To anyone watching, he looked like a guy who maybe delivered food or fixed computers or was just lost. What nobody knew, what nobody could have possibly guessed, was that Ethan Miles had just bought this entire building. The whole company. All of it. $600 million. The deal had closed exactly 1 week ago. And now here he was, the owner, walking in like he owned the place. Because he did. He pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the lobby. Immediately, the warmth hit him, along with that particular smell expensive buildings have, something between fresh flowers and money. The lobby was enormous. Marble everywhere. Chrome, elevators, lining the far wall like soldiers at attention. In the center, a massive reception desk curved like a crescent moon, and behind it sat a woman in a crisp white blouse, her hair pulled back, so tight it probably gave her headaches. Her name was Caroline, though Ethan didn't know that yet. And Caroline was about to make the first mistake of many that would happen in this building today. She glanced up as Ethan approached. Her professional smile was already in place, that customer service smile we all know, the one that doesn't quite reach the eyes. But then her gaze traveled from his face down to his hoodie, to his ripped jeans, to his worn-out sneakers. And just like that, the smile faded. Not all the way. Just enough. Just enough to show what she was really thinking. "Can I help you?" she asked. The words were polite. The tone was not. "Good morning," Ethan said warmly. "I need to head up to the executive floor, please." Caroline blinked. Then she let out a small laugh, the kind that's trying not to be rude, but absolutely is. "Sir, the executive floors are restricted access. If you're here for a delivery, you'll need to use the service entrance around the side of the building." Ethan didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He just smiled and said, "I'm not here for a delivery. I have business on the top floor." Something flickered across Caroline's face. Annoyance, maybe, or disbelief. She picked up her phone without breaking eye contact. "Security to the main lobby, please." And that's when Ethan knew. This was exactly what he'd come here to see. Not the marble, not the chrome, not the expensive art on the walls. He came to see this. How people treated someone they thought didn't matter. How a company showed its true face when it thought nobody important was watching. Within 2 minutes, two security guards arrived. Both big guys, the kind who looked like they used to play football and never quite got over it. They approached Ethan with that particular walk, the kind that's supposed to intimidate. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," the taller one said. "I'm happy to wait here," Ethan replied calmly, gesturing to the leather chairs near the window. "I'm not causing any trouble. Sir, I'll just sit right here." And he did. He walked over to one of those expensive leather chairs and sat down, crossing his arms. Not aggressive, not defiant, just waiting. The guards looked at each other, unsure what to do with someone who wasn't arguing but also wasn't leaving. Caroline kept glancing over, her face tight with irritation. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan just watched, and what he saw told him everything. A man in a tailored suit walked in. Caroline practically leaped out of her chair to greet him. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Can I get you anything? Coffee? I'll have someone bring it right up." A woman with a designer bag and perfect makeup came through. "Ms. Chun, wonderful to see you. I'll let them know you're on your way up." Then a young black man in a delivery uniform came to drop off a package. Caroline barely looked at him, just pointed to a table near the side door and went back to her computer. Didn't say good morning. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything. Ethan saw it all. He filed it away. These were the small moments that revealed the truth. The moments when people thought nobody was keeping score. Then the elevator doors opened and everything changed. Richard Hale stepped into the lobby. If Northcrest Financial had a face, it would look like Richard Hale. Tall, maybe 6'2". Salt and pepper hair, perfectly styled. A suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Sharp jaw, sharper eyes, the kind of man who walked into rooms and expected them to rearrange themselves around him. He was the chief operating officer, the COO, and he wore his authority like cologne. Too much of it. Richard was mid-conversation on his phone, barely paying attention to where he was walking when he noticed Ethan sitting in the lobby. His eyes narrowed. He ended his call with a quick, "I'll call you back," and walked directly toward the reception desk. "Caroline," he said, his voice carrying across the marble floor, "why is there a vagrant in our lobby?" Ethan felt the word land. Vagrant. Not visitor. Not guest. Vagrant. Caroline looked flustered. "Mr. Hale, I called security. He won't leave. He keeps saying he has business upstairs, but obviously he doesn't." Richard turned and looked directly at Ethan. Not with curiosity. With disdain. With the kind of look that says, "I already know everything about you and none of it matters." Richard walked over, each step deliberate. He stopped about 5 feet away, just far enough to maintain distance, close enough to make his point. "You must be lost," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled. The voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Maintenance and deliveries are handled on the lower level. I suggest you head down there before this becomes a bigger issue than it needs to be." Ethan looked up at him. Made eye contact. Held it. "No," Ethan said quietly. "I'm right where I need to be." For just a second, just a flash, something like surprise crossed Richard's face. People didn't say no to Richard Hale. Not here. Not in this building. But then the surprise turned to something colder. He smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was the kind of smile a shark might make if sharks could smile. "Caroline," Richard said, not taking his eyes off Ethan, "if this individual is still in the lobby in 5 minutes, call the police. We don't need his kind loitering where clients might see." His kind. Those two words hung in the air like smoke. Richard walked away, back toward the elevators, already moving on to more important things. Ethan watched him go. Watched how Richard nodded to another executive who stepped out of the elevator. Watched how that executive laughed at whatever Richard said. How they both glanced back at Ethan like he was part of some private joke. And Ethan understood. This wasn't personal. Richard didn't hate him specifically. Richard didn't even know him. This was policy. This was culture. This was how things worked here. If you didn't look the part, you didn't matter. And if you didn't matter, you could be dismissed, humiliated, erased. But here's the thing Richard Hale didn't know yet. Couldn't have known. Ethan Miles didn't just buy a company last week. He bought Richard's company, Richard's building, Richard's job, and in about 7 days, Richard Hale was going to find out that the man in the hoodie, the man he just called a vagrant, was the person who now controlled everything Richard had spent 15 years building. But not yet. That revelation would come. For now, Ethan had more to see. He left the building that morning without making a scene, just stood up, nodded politely to the confused security guards, and walked back out into the cold February air. As he stood on the sidewalk, he pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Marcus," he said when his head of security answered. "I need an employee badge. Junior IT department. Someone who won't ask questions." "Already done," Marcus replied. "It'll be ready tomorrow morning." Perfect. That's the thing about being a billionaire who doesn't look like one. People underestimate you. And when people underestimate you, they stop being careful. They show you who they really are. Over the next 3 days, Ethan Miles became invisible. He had a badge now, a name that belonged to a junior IT staffer who'd been quietly moved to a different project. With that badge, Ethan could go almost anywhere in the building. He attended meetings sitting in the back, taking notes. He stood in hallways, listening to conversations people didn't think mattered. He ate lunch in the cafeteria, where the real truth of any company lives. And what he saw made him angry. Not the loud kind of angry, the quiet kind, the dangerous kind. He saw a talented graphic designer, a young Latina woman named Sophia, present a brilliant marketing concept in a meeting. Watched as the senior director, a middle-aged white man named Craig, nodded through her presentation without really listening. Then, not 15 minutes later, watched Craig present the exact same concept as his own idea to another executive. Sophia wasn't even mentioned. He saw an engineering meeting where 3 women tried to contribute ideas, only to be interrupted and talked over repeatedly by male colleagues. One woman finally just stopped trying. Just sat there, silent, while men who knew less than her made decisions. He saw the leadership board, 12 people, 11 white, 11 men, 1 woman who barely spoke. But most importantly, he met Naomi Pierce. It was in the cafeteria on his 4th day undercover. Ethan was sitting alone, eating a sandwich, when a woman sat down at the table next to him. She was maybe 30, with dark skin, natural hair pulled back in a bun, and the kind of tired eyes that come from fighting battles you're not supposed to talk about. She was on her phone, earbuds in, reviewing something on her screen. Every few seconds, she'd shake her head slightly, make a note, then keep scrolling. Ethan could see the edge of her badge, Naomi Pierce, senior financial analyst. After a few minutes, she pulled out her earbuds and noticed him watching. "Sorry," Ethan said quickly. "Didn't mean to stare. You just looked really focused." Naomi smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Just trying to fix something that'll never get fixed." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, looked at him, really looked, as if trying to decide if he was safe to talk to. Maybe it was the hoodie. Maybe it was the fact that he looked as out of place as she felt. But something made her decide to trust him. "I've been here 6 years," she said quietly. 6 years. And in that time, I've trained 3 people who are now my supervisors. 3. I've pitched projects that got ignored, then watched men present the same ideas 6 months later and get applauded. I've done everything right, and it doesn't matter. Because here..." She glanced around the cafeteria, then back at him. "Here, it's not about what you know. It's about what you look like." Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was personal. "What would you do if you could change it?" he asked. Naomi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Change it? You can't change a system that was built to work exactly like this. The only thing you can do is survive it or leave it. What if there was a third option?" She looked at him like he was naive, like he didn't understand how the world worked. "There's not." But Ethan saw something in her eyes. Not hope, exactly, but not complete resignation either. There was still a spark there. Still someone who believed in excellence, in fairness, in merit. Someone who'd been beaten down, but not broken. That afternoon, Naomi was called into a strategy meeting. Ethan managed to slip in behind a group of other analysts. He stood in the back, watching. The meeting was about optimizing the company's supply chain, a complex logistics challenge that could save millions if solved correctly. Naomi raised her hand. She'd clearly been thinking about this. She spoke clearly, confidently, laying out a solution that was both innovative and practical. Ethan could see it in her eyes. This was the kind of moment she'd been waiting for. A chance to show what she could do. She got about 30 seconds in before Richard Hale, who was running the meeting, held up his hand. "Naomi," he said with that same smooth voice, "I appreciate the input, but let's table this for now. We're trying to focus on more immediate solutions." "But this is immediate," Naomi said. "If we implement this by Q2, we'll circle back," Richard said with finality. Then he turned to a junior analyst named Brad, young, white, wearing a tie that cost more than Naomi's entire outfit. "Brad, you had something?" Brad proceeded to pitch an idea that was, at best, half as good as Naomi's. Richard nodded enthusiastically, took notes, asked follow-up questions, told Brad to develop it further. Naomi sat back in her chair and Ethan saw it, that spark in her eyes dimming. Just a little bit. Just enough. After the meeting, Ethan found her in the hallway. She was standing by a window, looking out at the Seattle skyline, her arms crossed. "I saw what happened in there," Ethan said quietly. "She didn't turn around. That's just how it works here. It's wrong. Wrong doesn't matter. Power does." Ethan stood next to her, both of them looking out at the city. The rain had started again. That endless Seattle rain that makes everything look gray and heavy. "What if I told you," Ethan said carefully, "that things were about to change here?" Naomi finally looked at him. "Are you some kind of union organizer? Because if you are, you should know they fire people for that here. No warning. Just gone." "I'm not a union organizer." "Then what are you?" He wanted to tell her. Right then. Wanted to say, "I'm the person who owns this building. I'm the person who can fire Richard Hale tomorrow. I'm the person who can make sure you never get ignored again." But he couldn't. Not yet. Because if he revealed himself now, everything would change. People would start performing, start acting like they believed in fairness and equality when they didn't. He needed to see more, needed to document more, needed to understand exactly how deep this rut went. So instead he just said, "I'm someone who thinks you deserve better." Naomi studied his face for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from finding something absurd. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I used to think that too. I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just excellent enough, it would matter. But excellence doesn't matter here. Only optics do. And She gestured at herself. "I'm the wrong optic." Those words hit Ethan like a punch. I'm the wrong optic. That's what this place had done to her. Made her believe that her brilliance didn't matter because of how she looked. That night, Ethan sat in his apartment, the expensive kind of apartment that billionaires have, with floor-to-ceiling windows and art that costs more than cars. But he wasn't looking at any of it. He was looking at his notes. Pages and pages of observations. Patterns of discrimination so obvious, so systematic, that it couldn't be accidental. This was designed. This was intentional. Northcrest Financial didn't just have a problem. It had a culture. And that culture was maintained by people like Richard Hale, people who believed that success came with a particular face, a particular background, a particular look. And anyone who didn't fit that mold could be dismissed as easily as trash. Ethan made a decision that night. He wasn't just going to clean house. He was going to burn the old house down and build something new. Something fair. Something that gave people like Naomi Pierce the chance they'd earned. But first, he needed them to show their hand completely. Needed them to reveal just how corrupt they were willing to be. Because when the reckoning came, and it would come, he wanted there to be no doubt. No ambiguity. No way for anyone to pretend they didn't know. So he waited, watched, documented, and in the shadows of Northcrest Financial, a storm was gathering. The kind of storm that changes everything. The kind that tears down buildings so new ones can rise. The man in the hoodie wasn't going anywhere. He was just getting started. You know what they say about poking a bear? Don't do it. But what about when the bear needs to be poked? What about when the bear has been terrorizing the forest for so long that everyone's forgotten what peace looks like? Sometimes you have to wake the beast. Sometimes you have to let it show its teeth. Because only then can everyone see what it really is. Ethan Miles was about to find out just how sharp those teeth could be. It was day 7 of his undercover operation. 7 days of borrowed ID badges and sitting in the back of meetings. 7 days of watching, listening, documenting. 7 days of seeing good people get crushed while mediocre people got promoted. And Richard Hale was starting to notice. See, Richard didn't become chief operating officer by being careless. He got there by being paranoid, by watching, by noticing patterns. And there was a pattern he didn't like, a man in a hoodie who kept showing up in places he shouldn't be, asking questions he shouldn't ask, taking notes when he should have just been fixing computers. It started with small things. Marcus in accounting mentioned seeing the new IT guy in a finance strategy meeting. Sandra in HR thought she saw him in the executive wing when there were no open service tickets. And then Craig, the marketing director, mentioned something that made Richard's instincts fire like alarm bells. That tech guy asked me about our promotion policies. Seemed really interested in who got moved up and why. Richard Hale didn't get where he was by ignoring his instincts. That afternoon, he called down to IT. "I need information on your newest hire," he said. "The one who's been doing rounds on the upper floors." The IT manager sounded confused. "Sir, we haven't hired anyone new in 3 months. The guy in the hoodie, early 30s, been sitting in on meetings." There was a pause, a long one. "Sir, I don't know who you're talking about. If someone's using IT credentials they shouldn't have." Richard hung up. His jaw tightened. He opened his computer and accessed the security system, a system he had admin privileges to because he demanded them years ago when he argued that COOs needed oversight of everything. He pulled up the badge logs and started searching. It took him 20 minutes, but he found it. An ID badge registered to a junior analyst named Kevin Chun who'd been transferred to a subsidiary office in Portland 2 weeks ago. But according to the building logs, Kevin's badge had been used every day this week. Multiple floors. Multiple access points. Someone was using a badge that shouldn't exist. Someone was accessing files, sitting in meetings, watching them. And Richard Hale knew exactly what that meant. Corporate espionage, a whistleblower, maybe even a journalist doing an undercover expose. His mind raced. What had this person seen? What had they documented? More importantly, what could they prove? Richard had spent 15 years building his empire at Northcrest. He'd made decisions that weren't always clean, decisions that looked good on spreadsheets, but ugly in daylight. He'd passed over dozens of qualified candidates because they didn't fit the culture. He'd silenced complaints, buried HR reports, and made sure that anyone who challenged the system found themselves suddenly without a job. All of it was protected, buried, forgotten. But if someone had been watching, recording, documenting, Richard picked up his phone and called Gavin Trent. Gavin was the kind of ally every corrupt man needs. He'd been on Northcrest's board for 12 years, and in that time, he'd perfected the art of looking respectable while doing terrible things. Silver hair, expensive glasses, a smile that made shareholders trust him while employees feared him. He and Richard had worked together on dozens of situations, the kind that required discretion. "We have a problem," Richard said when Gavin answered. "I'm listening. Someone's been inside, watching us, using fake credentials. I don't know who they are yet, but they've been here for at least a week, maybe longer." Gavin was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can you find them?" "I'm working on it." "Work faster." "And Richard, when you find them..." Gavin's voice got very quiet, very cold. "Make sure they understand what happens to people who threaten us." Richard smiled. It was the same smile he'd given Ethan in the lobby a week ago. The shark smile. Already planning it. By the next morning, Richard had a face to go with the badge. Security footage from multiple cameras. A man in a hoodie, always with his head slightly down, but not careful enough. Richard had facial recognition software against company policy, but he had it anyway, and he ran every frame through the system. Nothing. No matches. Whoever this person was, they weren't in any corporate database, which meant they were either very good at hiding their identity, or they weren't who Richard thought they were. Either way, he needed to find them. Now. But then Richard had a better idea. A worse idea. The kind of idea that comes from a man who's more interested in winning than being right. If he couldn't find the spy directly, he'd find them indirectly. He'd apply pressure, create chaos, force them to reveal themselves. And he knew exactly where to apply that pressure. Naomi Pierce. Richard had noticed her talking to the man in the hoodie multiple times. In the cafeteria, in the hallway after that strategy meeting, and according to badge logs, she'd accessed some of the same files that the fake badge had accessed. Maybe she was the leak. Maybe she was helping the spy. Or maybe, and this was the beautiful part, maybe she had nothing to do with it at all, but nobody would be able to prove that. Richard called HR. I need you to open an investigation into Naomi Pierce. Senior analyst. I have reason to believe she's been leaking confidential company data to an outside party. The HR director, a nervous man named Todd, who did whatever Richard told him to do, stammered, what evidence do we have? Badge access logs showing she's been in files above her clearance level. Multiple meetings with an unidentified individual who's been using fraudulent credentials, and a pattern of unusual activity that coincides with his presence in the building. None of that was technically false. It just wasn't technically true either. But it sounded convincing. It sounded like evidence. And in corporate America, sounding convincing was often more important than being right. Start the investigation today, Richard said. And Todd, I want her restricted from all sensitive projects immediately. Supervised access only. I want her to know we're watching. Todd hesitated. Richard, if we're wrong about this, we're not wrong. Do it. Naomi Pierce was in the middle of reviewing quarterly projections when her computer screen went black. Just for a second, then a message appeared. Your access credentials have been temporarily restricted. Please report to HR immediately. Her stomach dropped. That message only appeared for one reason. When you were being investigated, she grabbed her phone and headed to HR, her mind racing. What had she done? She'd been careful. She always followed protocol. She never accessed files she wasn't supposed to. She never. But then she remembered. The conversation with the guy in the hoodie. The one who'd been asking questions about how the company worked. The one who'd seemed so interested in the promotion process and the leadership structure. She'd thought he was just another disillusioned employee, someone who saw what she saw. But what if he was something else? What if she'd been set up? The HR office felt like a courtroom. Todd sat behind his desk with another HR representative, a stone-faced woman named Patricia, who specialized in terminations. There was also someone from legal. This wasn't a friendly conversation. This was an execution. Naomi, thank you for coming, Todd said, his voice trying for sympathetic, but landing somewhere around guilty. We need to ask you some questions about your recent file access and interactions with an unauthorized individual. What unauthorized individual? We're not at liberty to say, but we have security footage showing you in multiple conversations with someone who's been using fraudulent credentials to access our systems. Naomi felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't given anyone access to anything. Patricia slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots, badge access logs showing times and locations. And there, highlighted in yellow, were her name and another badge ID. One she didn't recognize, accessing files within minutes of each other. Can you explain this pattern? Patricia asked. Naomi looked at the pages. The timing looked damning. Like coordination. Like conspiracy. But she hadn't coordinated anything. She'd just been doing her job. And talking to someone she thought was, what? A friend? An ally? Someone who understood? I accessed those files as part of my normal work, Naomi said, her voice shaking slightly. I have clearance for financial analysis. That's my job. I don't know anything about another badge. But you do know about another person, Todd said. Security has you on camera with an unidentified male multiple times over the past week. Who is he? I don't know his name. We talked a couple times. He seemed new. I thought he worked here. Did you share information with him? We talked about work, about meetings, about... She stopped because she realized how it sounded. She'd complained about the company, about Richard, about the promotion system, to a stranger who might have been recording everything. About what, Naomi? Patricia pressed. About how things work here, Naomi said quietly. About the culture. The three of them exchanged looks, the kind of looks that said, "We've got her." Todd cleared his throat. Naomi, effective immediately, you're being placed on administrative leave while we complete our investigation. Your projects will be reassigned. Your building access is suspended. You'll be contacted when we have more information. You're suspending me? For what? For talking to someone? For potential corporate espionage, Patricia said flatly. This is a very serious matter. If you have information about this individual or his activities, now would be the time to share it. But Naomi had nothing to share, because she knew nothing. She was innocent. But innocence doesn't matter when someone powerful has already decided you're guilty. She left HR in a daze. Security was waiting to escort her to her desk, watch her pack her personal items into a box, and walk her out of the building. The walk of shame. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. By tomorrow, they'd all be whispering. Did you hear about Naomi? Apparently, she was stealing company secrets. I always thought she seemed suspicious. That's how it works. The accusation becomes the truth before any investigation even starts. Naomi stood outside the building, the same building she'd walked into every day for 6 years, holding a cardboard box with a framed photo, a coffee mug, and a plant that was probably going to die now because she wouldn't be here to water it. And she felt something she'd never quite felt before. Not just anger, not just hurt, something deeper. Betrayal. Complete and total betrayal. By the company that had already been slowly destroying her. And by a man in a hoodie who she'd thought might actually give a damn. Ethan found out what happened 2 hours later. He'd been out of the building that morning, meeting with his lawyers about the transition plan. When he came back, using his fake badge one more time, he noticed the gossip immediately. People in clusters, whispering. He caught fragments. Naomi Pierce. Corporate espionage. Escorted out by security. His blood went cold. He found someone he'd befriended, a junior analyst named Marcus who loved to talk. What happened with Naomi Pierce? Marcus leaned in like he was sharing nuclear codes. Dude, she got caught leaking information to some outside guy. They suspended her this morning. Like immediately. Richard Hale personally ordered the investigation. People are saying she might even face criminal charges. Ethan felt the rage building. White hot and immediate. He knew exactly what had happened. Richard had figured out someone was watching, and instead of trying to find Ethan, he'd gone after the most vulnerable person connected to him. The one person who had nothing to do with any of this except being kind enough to talk to a stranger. Richard Hale had just declared war. He just didn't know who he was fighting yet. That evening, Ethan sat in his car outside Naomi's apartment building. He'd gotten her address from employment records he legally owned now, though she didn't know that. He sat there for an hour, trying to figure out what to say, how to explain, how to tell her that everything was his fault. Finally, he got out and pressed the buzzer for her apartment. Who is it? Her voice through the intercom sounded hollow, defeated. It's me, the guy from the cafeteria. We need to talk. There was a long silence. Then, I have nothing to say to you. Naomi, please. I can explain. Explain what? How you destroyed my career. How you used me to get information and then disappeared when they came after me. I don't know who you are or what you wanted, but you got it. Congratulations. I didn't want any of this. Let me come up. Please. 5 minutes. Another long silence. Then the door buzzed. She let him in. Probably so she could slam the door in his face. Ethan wouldn't have blamed her. He took the stairs to the third floor. Apartment 3B. He knocked. Naomi opened the door, but she didn't invite him in. She looked exhausted, eyes red, still wearing her work clothes, because she probably hadn't had the energy to change. 5 minutes, she said. What they did to you today, it's my fault. All of it. Richard figured out someone was watching, and he went after you to get to me. Who are you? Naomi asked. Really? Because you're not IT. You're not an analyst? So, who are you, and why did you ruin my life? Ethan wanted to tell her everything, right there in that hallway, but he couldn't. Not yet, because if he revealed himself now, Richard would know, would prepare, would cover his tracks. Ethan needed Richard to feel safe, needed him to overplay his hand completely. I can't tell you everything yet, Ethan said, but I can tell you this. I'm going to fix it. All of it. Richard Hale is going to pay for what he did to you. I promise. Naomi laughed, but it was bitter. Broken. You can't fix this. Do you understand what just happened? My career is over. Not just at Northcrest, everywhere. You think anyone's going to hire someone accused of corporate espionage? You think I'm going to get a fair hearing? This is what they do. They destroy you. And promises from some guy I don't even know? That doesn't fix anything. She started to close the door, but Ethan stopped it with his hand. Gently, not forcing, just stopping. I'll fix this, he said again. I know you don't believe me. I know you have no reason to. But I need you to trust me for just a little bit longer. Can you do that? Naomi looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, looking for lies, looking for truth, looking for anything that might tell her if this person standing in her hallway was going to save her or finish destroying her. 1 week, she finally said, you have 1 week to fix this. If nothing changes by then, I'm calling a lawyer and going public with everything I know about that company. I don't care what it costs me. 1 week, Ethan agreed. That's all I need. She closed the door. He heard the lock click, and Ethan stood there in that hallway, feeling the weight of what he'd done. He'd wanted to see the truth of Northcrest. He'd found it, but the cost of that truth had been Naomi's career, Naomi's reputation, Naomi's trust. He'd wanted to be a hero, but right now he felt like the villain. Richard Hale, meanwhile, was feeling quite heroic. He sat in his office that evening with Gavin Trent, both of them drinking expensive scotch and celebrating their victory. They'd identified the leak, or at least a leak. They'd stopped it, and they'd sent a message to everyone at Northcrest. This is what happens when you cross us. She'll probably sue, Gavin said, swirling his drink. They always sue. Let her, Richard replied. We'll bury her in legal fees. She'll run out of money long before we run out of lawyers. By the time it's over, she'll wish she'd just taken the severance package and disappeared quietly. What about the other one? The man she was talking to? Richard shrugged. Probably a journalist or a competitor's spy. Either way, he'll disappear now that his source is burned. These people always do. They toasted. To victory. To power. To a system that protected men like them while crushing people like Naomi Pierce. But what Richard Hale didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the man in the hoodie wasn't a journalist, wasn't a spy, wasn't going to disappear. And in exactly 3 days, Richard Hale was going to walk into a meeting where his entire world would come crashing down around him. Because the man he dismissed as a vagrant, the man he'd had thrown out of the lobby, the man he'd just framed an innocent woman to trap, that man owned everything Richard thought he controlled. And Monday morning was coming fast. The weekend was a blur. Ethan didn't sleep much. He spent Saturday and Sunday with his legal team going over every piece of evidence he'd gathered, every conversation, every document, every pattern of discrimination and abuse. His lawyers laid it out like a prosecution case, and it was airtight. But Ethan wanted more than justice. He wanted vindication. He wanted Naomi's name cleared. He wanted Richard Hale to understand exactly who he'd been dealing with. Sunday night, he sent a message to the entire Northcrest board of directors. The subject line was simple: Emergency shareholder meeting, Monday 9 a.m., attendance mandatory. It came from Summit Equity's official account, the account that now controlled 87% of Northcrest Financial. The board had no choice but to attend. Richard got the notification on his phone at 10 p.m. He stared at it confused. Summit Equity? The investment firm that had bought Northcrest? They'd been silent since the acquisition closed. Why were they suddenly calling a meeting? He called Gavin. Did you get this? I did. What do you think it's about? No idea. But it's our company. Whatever they want, we'll handle it. We've been doing this for 15 years. Some investment firm isn't going to tell us how to run things. But there was something in Richard's voice. A crack. A tiny seed of doubt. Because powerful men might be arrogant, but they're not stupid. And that emergency meeting notice? That felt like something bigger than a routine check-in. That felt like a reckoning. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Same Seattle weather. Same marble lobby. Same building. But everything was about to change. At 8:45 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside Northcrest Financial. Security doors opened, and Ethan Miles stepped out. But this time, he wasn't wearing a hoodie. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than Caroline the receptionist made in a month. Hairstyled, clean-shaven, flanked by 6 members of Summit Equity's executive team, plus his head of security, and 3 lawyers carrying briefcases that looked very serious and very expensive. Caroline was at the reception desk. She glanced up with her professional smile already in place. Then she saw him, really saw him. The smile froze. Her face went pale, because she recognized him. The man from 2 weeks ago. The man she'd had security called on. The man Richard had dismissed as a vagrant. Ethan walked directly toward her, pulled out a badge, his real badge, and placed it on her desk. It was engraved with his name and title, Ethan Miles, majority owner, Northcrest Financial Group. Good morning, Caroline, he said pleasantly. I believe I mentioned I had business on the executive floor. She couldn't speak, literally couldn't form words. Just watched as Ethan and his team walked past her toward the elevators, the same elevators she'd tried to keep him from using, the same elevators that now belonged to him. Word spread through the building like wildfire. The new owner was here, in person, right now, and he was the guy Richard Hale had thrown out 2 weeks ago. By the time Ethan reached the top-floor conference room, every member of the board was already there, waiting, nervous. Richard sat at his usual spot, the head of the table, looking confident, but with that same crack in his armor. Something was wrong, and he knew it. Ethan walked in, didn't say hello, didn't introduce himself, just walked to the head of the table, Richard's spot, and stood there. Richard started to speak. Excuse me, this is a private board. He stopped, because he recognized Ethan, recognized him immediately. The vagrant, the maintenance guy, the person he'd humiliated in the lobby. The chairman of the board, an older man named Robert Chun, stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Ethan Miles, founder and CEO of Summit Equity, and as of 2 weeks ago, the majority owner of Northcrest Financial Group. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop, heard hearts breaking, heard careers ending. Ethan sat down in Richard's chair, looked directly at him. When I walked into this building 2 weeks ago, Ethan said calmly, you treated me like I didn't belong. You called security. You told me to go to the maintenance level. You looked at me like I was garbage. Richard's face had gone from pale to red, embarrassment turning to rage. I wanted to see if it was personal, Ethan continued, or if that's just how this company operates. If that's how you treat anyone who doesn't look the part, who doesn't fit your idea of what success should look like. He looked around the room, at the board members who were starting to understand what had happened, what they were about to witness. Turns out, Ethan said, it was policy, a policy that's about to change, starting with the leadership. Richard stood up. You have no right to come in here and... I have every right, Ethan cut him off, his voice sharp now. I own this company, which means I own your job, and right now, your job is to sit down and listen. Richard remained standing, His hands were shaking, with rage, with fear, with the sudden realization that he'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But Ethan wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because what Richard Hale didn't know was that his real punishment hadn't started yet. It was about to. There's a moment in every story where the mask comes off, where secrets stop being secrets, where the person everyone underestimated shows exactly who they've been all along. This is that moment. And for Richard Hale, sitting in that conference room watching his world crack apart, this moment was about to become a nightmare he'd never wake up from. Ethan Miles sat at the head of the table, perfectly calm. Around him, the board members shifted uncomfortably. Some looked confused. Others looked scared. They'd been summoned to an emergency meeting by their new owner, and now that owner was staring down their chief operating officer with the intensity of someone who knew things. Dangerous things. Richard remained standing, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. "This is highly irregular," he said, trying to regain control. "If you have concerns about operations, we have proper channels." "Sit down, Richard," Ethan said quietly. Something in his voice, something cold and final, made Richard's legs obey before his pride could stop them. He sat, hard, like someone had cut his strings. Ethan opened the tablet in front of him. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've been observing this company from inside. I wanted to understand how it really operates when nobody thinks the owner is watching. What I found was illuminating." He pressed a button. The large screen at the end of the conference room flickered to life. "Let's start with February 15th. My first day here." The screen showed security footage from the lobby. Crystal clear. High definition. There was Ethan in his hoodie and ripped jeans, walking through the revolving doors. There was Caroline's face, her smile fading as she looked him up and down, her hand reaching for the phone to call security. The board watched in silence. Then the footage switched angles. Richard Hale, walking into frame, phone to his ear, spotting Ethan, the contempt on his face visible even through the camera. The audio kicked in. They could hear every word. "Caroline, why is there a vagrant in our lobby?" Ethan let it play. Let everyone hear Richard's voice dripping with disdain as he told Caroline to call the police if this individual didn't leave. Let them hear him say, "We don't need his kind loitering where clients might see." His kind. Those 2 words hung in the air like smoke. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One woman, Victoria Chun, the only female board member, closed her eyes like she was in pain. "That was day 1, Ethan said. I hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't caused any trouble. I just didn't look like I belonged. And that was enough for your COO to treat me like a criminal." Richard's face had gone from red to pale. "I didn't know who you were. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently," Ethan interrupted. "That's exactly my point. You treat people based on what they look like, not who they are. But let's keep going." He clicked again. The screen showed interior footage, meeting rooms, hallways, the cafeteria, all of it time-stamped and dated. "This is February 17th, a strategy meeting about supply chain optimization." The video showed a conference room. Naomi Pierce standing at the whiteboard, presenting her idea, her voice coming through clearly, confidently. She was brilliant. Anyone watching could see that. Her solution was elegant, practical, innovative. Then Richard's voice cutting her off. "Naomi, I appreciate the input, but let's table this for now." The video continued. Naomi trying to explain why her solution was time-sensitive. Richard dismissing her again. Then turning to Brad, young white privileged Brad, and asking for his input with genuine interest. Brad's idea was half as good, but Richard praised it, took notes, asked him to develop it further. The contrast was devastating. Same meeting, Ethan said. 2 people, 2 ideas, only one taken seriously. Want to guess why? Nobody answered, but everyone knew. Ethan clicked through more footage. Sophia's marketing concept being stolen by her supervisor. 3 women being talked over in an engineering meeting. A talented black analyst named Marcus being passed over for promotion in favor of someone with half his experience, but the right family connections. Pattern after pattern after pattern. This isn't bias, Ethan said. Bias is accidental. This is systematic. This is cultural. This is a company that was designed to elevate certain people while suppressing others. And Richard, you've been the architect of that design for 15 years. Richard finally found his voice. That's not fair. We have diversity initiatives. You have paperwork, Ethan cut him off. You have policies that look good in annual reports. But you know what you don't have? You don't have fairness. You don't have equality. You don't have a system that actually values talent over optics. Gavin Trent, sitting 3 seats down from Richard, cleared his throat. He'd been quiet until now, watching, carefully calculating. Mr. Miles, while I understand your concerns, I think you're making broad accusations based on limited... Ethan turned to look at Gavin. Really look at him. Mr. Trent, would you like me to show everyone what happened when Richard discovered someone was watching? When he realized he'd been caught, Gavin's confident expression flickered. Just for a second. Just enough. Ethan clicked again. The screen showed Richard's office. Interior camera. The timestamp read February 21st, 4 days ago. Richard was on the phone with Gavin, and the audio was perfect. Richard's voice? We have a problem. Someone's been inside. Watching us. Using fake credentials. Gavin's voice. Can you find them? I'm working on it. Work faster. And Richard, when you find them, make sure they understand what happens to people who threaten us. The room went dead silent. Gavin's face drained of color. But Ethan wasn't done. February 22nd, he said, clicking to the next video, Richard's office again. This footage showed Richard, on his computer, pulling up employee files, zooming in on Naomi Pierce's record, then making a phone call to HR. I need you to open an investigation into Naomi Pierce. I have reason to believe she's been leaking confidential company data. The HR director's voice tinny through the speaker. What evidence do we have? Richard's answer was chilling in its calculation. Badge access logs showing she's been in files above her clearance level. Multiple meetings with an unidentified individual. And a pattern of unusual activity that coincides with his presence. Ethan paused the video. Let everyone absorb what they'd just heard. None of that was true, Ethan said. Naomi Pierce never leaked anything. Never accessed unauthorized files. Never did anything wrong. Richard knew that. But he needed a scapegoat. He needed to apply pressure to find me. So he destroyed an innocent woman's career to protect himself. Victoria Chin spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. You framed her? Richard, tell me you didn't. It was a reasonable suspicion based on available evidence, Richard said, but his voice had no conviction. He knew how it looked, knew how it sounded. It was character assassination, Ethan corrected. It was a deliberate act of cruelty designed to intimidate anyone who might challenge you. And it gets worse. He clicked again. The screen showed email exchanges, not from the company server, from a personal account. Richard's personal account. Messages between him and Gavin discussing their next move. One email, dated February 23rd. We need to go nuclear. If we can't find the whistleblower, we discredit him. Create a scandal. Make it about inappropriate relationships. The Pierce woman and this mystery man. Plant the story that they're involved. Make it look like nepotism, favoritism. Nobody trusts a whistleblower with a personal agenda. Gavin's response. I have contacts at the Seattle Daily. They owe me a favor. Give me 24 hours. The room erupted, not with shouting, with gasps, with whispers, with the sound of people realizing they'd been working alongside monsters. Ethan pulled up the next document. The front page of the Seattle Daily from 2 days ago. The headline, Undercover CEO Accused of Nepotism and Internal Misconduct. This article, Ethan said, was planted by Richard and Gavin. Every word of it was fabricated. They forged emails. They created fake evidence. They leaked it to a journalist they'd bribed. And why? Because they thought I was a journalist, a whistleblower, someone who might expose what they'd been doing for years. He looked directly at Gavin. You didn't know who I was. But you knew you were guilty of enough that anyone watching would find something to expose. So you tried to destroy them first. Gavin stood up. This is absurd. We were protecting the company from industrial espionage. If we made mistakes in judgment. You forged documents, Ethan said flatly. You fabricated evidence. You bribed a journalist. Those aren't mistakes in judgment. Those are crimes. He clicked one more time. The screen filled with metadata, digital fingerprints, timestamps showing when documents were created, when they were modified, when they were deleted. Every single forged email traced back to Richard's personal computer and Gavin's tablet. I built the digital security system this company uses, Ethan said, 5 years ago, before I sold it to Northcrest for implementation. I know every line of code, every logging function, every backdoor, and I've been recording everything from the moment I bought this company. Every login, every file access, every deleted document, every whispered conversation in offices you thought were private. The board members looked around the room, suddenly aware that the cameras they'd always ignored were watching. Had always been watching. Richard, Gavin, you've been playing a game you didn't know was rigged against you from the start, Ethan continued. Every move you made, I documented. Every lie you told, I recorded. Every person you hurt, I witnessed. He stood up, placing both hands on the table. The evidence I've compiled has been shared with the board, with our legal team, and with law enforcement. You're not just fired. You're under investigation for fraud, falsifying documents, harassment, and conspiracy. Richard's world was ending in real time. You could see it in his eyes. The realization, the horror. 15 years of building power, gone in 15 minutes. This is a coup, Richard said desperately. You can't just come in here and... I can, Ethan said, because I own this company. And more importantly, because I'm right. The board will vote on your termination now. All in favor of immediately terminating Richard Hale and Gavin Trent for cause, raise your hand. 10 hands went up. Immediately. Unanimously. Even the people who'd been Richard's allies for years couldn't distance themselves fast enough. Motion carries, Robertson said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Richard, Gavin, you're hereby terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to remove personal items from your offices under supervision. Your company accounts are frozen. Your access is revoked. Richard looked around the table, searching for support. For sympathy. For anything. He found nothing. Just faces turning away. People who'd smiled at him yesterday now couldn't bear to look at him. Security arrived, the same guards who'd tried to remove Ethan from the lobby 2 weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They stood on either side of Richard and Gavin, waiting. Richard stood slowly, looked at Ethan with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've just done. This company will fall apart without me. You'll regret this. No, Ethan said quietly. You'll regret this. Because you had every opportunity to be a good leader, to be fair, to be decent. Instead, you chose cruelty. You chose corruption. And now everyone knows exactly who you are. They walked Richard and Gavin out in silence. Through the executive floor where they'd ruled for years. Past employees who'd feared them, who'd suffered under them. Past assistants they'd dismissed. Past analysts they'd ignored. And as they walked, people stopped working, came out of offices, watched, not with sadness, with relief. The building seemed to breathe easier once they were gone. After the meeting ended, after the board members left with promises to cooperate fully with the transition, Ethan sat alone in the conference room. He should have felt victorious. He'd exposed corruption. He'd brought down tyrants. He'd won. But all he could think about was Naomi Pierce, the woman he'd promised to help, the woman whose life he'd accidentally destroyed, and then took 3 days too long to fix. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Ms. Pierce? This is Ethan Miles. I need you to come to Northcrest Financial immediately. There's something you need to see. Naomi arrived 40 minutes later. She debated not coming, debated blocking his number and pretending none of this had ever happened. But curiosity won. Or maybe hope. That tiny, dangerous thing that refuses to die, even when it should. She walked into the lobby, her former lobby, half expecting security to stop her. But instead, Caroline waved her through with a nervous smile. The kind of smile that said, "I know I messed up and I'm so sorry." Ethan met her at the elevators. He was still in his Navy suit, but he looked tired, like he'd just fought a war. Which, in a way, he had. "Come with me," he said. They rode up in silence. Naomi kept glancing at him, trying to understand. Who was this person? Why was he still here? What had happened in the 3 days since she'd seen him? They walked into the main conference room, the same room where, 2 weeks ago, Richard had dismissed her idea without a second thought. But now it was different. Now there were new people, lawyers, HR representatives, and Robert Chun, the chairman of the board. "Ms. Pierce," Robert said, standing to shake her hand, "thank you for coming. Please sit." Naomi sat, her heart pounding. This felt like another interrogation, another accusation. But then Robert slid a folder across the table. "This is a formal letter clearing you of all accusations," he said. "The investigation into you has been closed. The accusations were false, fabricated by Richard Hale and Gavin Trent in an attempt to cover their own misconduct. They've been terminated and are facing criminal charges." Naomi stared at the letter. "Read it once, twice, 3 times. I don't understand." Ethan sat down across from her. "Richard framed you to get me. He knew someone was watching him, and he used you as bait. Everything that happened to you, the suspension, the accusations, the humiliation, it was all because of me. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Who are you?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan Miles. I'm the founder of Summit Equity. 2 weeks ago, my firm acquired Northcrest Financial. I came in undercover because I wanted to see how this company really operated, how it treated people when there was no one important watching." The pieces started falling into place in Naomi's mind. The questions he'd asked, the meetings he'd sat in on, the way he'd seemed so interested in how things worked. "You bought the company," she said slowly. "You own it." "I do." "And you came in as what?" "A test. As an observation. I wanted to know if the company was worth saving or if it needed to be torn down completely. What I found was that the company has incredible people like you being suppressed by a toxic leadership culture. So I removed the leadership." Naomi looked at Robert. "Richard and Gavin are really gone?" "Escorted out 2 hours ago," Robert confirmed. "They won't be coming back." She should have felt relief. She should have felt vindicated. But mostly she just felt exhausted. "What happens to me now?" Ethan leaned forward. "That's up to you. The accusations against you have been expunged from all records. Your reputation is intact, better than intact. Everyone now knows you were targeted because Richard feared anyone associated with me. You're a victim, not a perpetrator. We'd like to offer you your position back with a formal apology and compensation for the distress caused." "My old position?" Naomi asked. "Actually," Ethan said, "I was hoping you'd consider a new position. Vice President of Strategy and Inclusion, leading the company's transformation, making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else here." Naomi laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. 3 days ago, she was being escorted out with a box of her belongings. Now she was being offered a VP position. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you're brilliant," Ethan said simply. "Because you've been here 6 years and you understand this company better than anyone. Because you've experienced firsthand what's broken, which makes you the perfect person to fix it. And because when I asked you what you'd do, if you could change things, you said there was no way to change a system built to work exactly like this. I want to prove you wrong. I want you to help me build something better." Naomi sat with that for a moment, felt the weight of it, the opportunity, the risk, the chance to actually matter. "What if I say no?" she asked. "Then I'll respect that decision," Ethan said. "And I'll still make sure every company in Seattle knows what happened to you here and that you're available and extraordinary. But I hope you say yes, because I can't do this without people who've lived through what was broken." She looked at the letter in front of her. at the lawyers and board members watching her carefully, at Ethan, the man in the hoodie who'd turned out to be so much more than he seemed. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need," Ethan replied. But as Naomi left that conference room, walked past her old desk, rode down the elevator, and stepped out into the Seattle afternoon, she already knew her answer. She was going to say yes. Because sometimes justice doesn't just knock down the villains. Sometimes it lifts up the people they tried to destroy. That evening, Ethan hosted a small dinner at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. Just him, his core legal team, and the few board members who'd supported the changes. The mood was celebratory but subdued. They'd won a battle, but the war to actually transform the company, was just beginning. Near the end of the dinner, Victoria Chin raised her glass. To Ethan for having the courage to see what was broken and the determination to fix it. They toasted, drank, and then Victoria asked the question several of them had been wondering: why did you really buy Northcrest? There are hundreds of companies you could have acquired. What made this one matter? Ethan set down his glass. He'd known this question would come eventually. "Gavin Trent," he said quietly. The table went silent. "I didn't tell the full story this morning," Ethan continued. "Gavin Trent is married to my aunt, my father's sister, Catherine. She cut ties with our family 15 years ago after marrying him. We didn't understand why at the time. She just disappeared from our lives." He paused, gathering the memory. 3 years ago, my father died. Cancer. Catherine didn't come to the funeral. Didn't call. Nothing. I was angry about it, so I started looking into why she'd pulled away. What I found was that Gavin had isolated her, controlled her, made her believe our family was toxic, when really he was the toxic one. He needed her isolated so he could control her money, her connections, her life. "I hired investigators," Ethan continued. "They found financial irregularities tied to Gavin going back a decade. Shell companies, embezzlement, kickback schemes. But it was all hidden, all protected by layers of corporate structure. And the center of that structure was Northcrest Financial. This was his home base, his kingdom." Victoria's eyes widened. "So, you bought the company to expose him?" "I bought it to save the people he was destroying," Ethan corrected. "Gavin wasn't just corrupt financially. He was corrupt ethically. He built a culture that protected people like him, people who valued power over people. And Richard was his perfect partner in that. They fed off each other." "When I discovered that Richard had framed Naomi, I realized something," Ethan said. "This wasn't just about Gavin anymore. This was about a system that crushes good people to protect bad ones. And I couldn't just fire them and walk away. I needed everyone to see it, to understand it, to witness what they'd been doing so that when we rebuilt, everyone would know why it mattered." Robert Chin shook his head slowly. "You gambled everything on the hope that they'd expose themselves." "It wasn't a gamble," Ethan said. "I knew they would. Corrupt people always do when they feel threatened. They don't hide better. They attack harder. And in attacking, they reveal exactly who they are." He looked around the table. "Gavin and Richard aren't just gone from Northcrest. The evidence I gathered is with federal prosecutors. They're facing criminal charges. My aunt is finally free of Gavin's control. And this company has a chance to become what it should have been all along." They sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. The truth of it. "What about Catherine?" Victoria asked gently. "Your aunt. Have you talked to her?" Ethan nodded. "Last week. First time in 15 years. She apologized, cried, said she didn't know how to get away from him until I gave her a way out. We're rebuilding. Slowly. But we're rebuilding." The dinner ended with quiet gratitude. These people understood now. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. This was personal justice wearing a business suit. 6 months later, Northcrest Financial looked nothing like it had in February. The executive team was completely new, diverse, merit-based. The promotion process had been overhauled with blind reviews and third-party audits. The culture of fear had been replaced with one of accountability and transparency. People spoke up in meetings now. Ideas came from everywhere, not just from the people who looked the part. And leading the transformation was Naomi Pierce, Vice President of Strategy and Inclusion. She'd accepted the position 2 weeks after the offer, spent the first month just listening, meeting with employees at every level, hearing their stories, documenting what needed to change. Then she presented a comprehensive reform plan that the board approved unanimously, and she'd been implementing it ever since, piece by piece, policy by policy. The company wasn't perfect. Change never happens perfectly. But it was better. Genuinely, measurably better. On a warm evening in August, Naomi stood on the rooftop terrace of Northcrest Financial, looking out at the Seattle skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She'd come up here to clear her head after a long day of budget meetings and policy reviews. She heard footsteps behind her, turned to see Ethan walking over, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one. "Thought you might need this," he said. She took it gratefully. "Thanks. What brings you up here?" "Same as you, probably. Sometimes you just need to step away and remember why you're doing all of this." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights start to flicker on. "Can I ask you something?" Naomi said finally. "Of course. Why didn't you tell me who you were from the start? In the cafeteria that day when we talked, you could have told me then. Could have explained. Would have saved us both a lot of pain." Ethan considered the question carefully. "Because truth doesn't shout," he said quietly. "It doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. It gathers strength until the moment is right to speak." "That's poetic," Naomi said with a slight smile, "but also kind of frustrating." "I know, and I'm sorry for that. But if I'd told you immediately, everything would have changed. You would have acted differently. Richard would have acted differently. I needed to see the company as it really was, not as it would pretend to be for the new owner. And was it worth it?" Naomi asked. "The deception, the pain, all of it." Ethan looked at her. "Ask me that again in a year, when we've seen if these changes actually stick, when we know if we really built something better or just swapped one set of problems for another." "Fair enough," Naomi said. She took a sip of her coffee, then added, "For what it's worth, I think it was worth it. Not the way it happened. I could have done without the terror and humiliation. But the result, what we're building now, that matters." "It does," Ethan agreed. "And none of it happens without you. I meant what I said in that meeting. I can't do this without people who've lived through what was broken. You're not just fixing policies, you're healing wounds. That's harder and more important." They stood together as the sun finished setting, as the city transformed from day to night, as one version of the world became another. And Naomi realized something. She'd spent 6 years at Northcrest believing she didn't matter, believing her work didn't matter, believing that excellence wasn't enough if you didn't look the part. But she'd been wrong. Excellence always matters. Truth always matters. Justice always matters. Sometimes it just takes longer than it should to arrive. Sometimes it wears a hoodie and ripped jeans. Sometimes it looks like nothing you expected. But when it arrives, when it finally speaks, when it tears down walls and builds new bridges, that's when you understand. That's when you see that the most powerful people in the room were never the ones shouting. They were the ones everyone ignored, until they couldn't be ignored anymore. 1 year later, Forbes magazine ran a feature article titled "The CEO Who Went Undercover: How Ethan Miles Transformed Northcrest Financial." The article detailed the entire story, the undercover operation, the exposure of corruption, the dramatic termination, the complete cultural overhaul, and most importantly, the results. Northcrest's employee satisfaction scores had increased by 67%. Retention of women and minority employees had gone from an industry-low 52% to an industry-leading 91%. The company's innovation pipeline had tripled, and profitability had increased by 28% because, surprise, surprise, when you actually value talent over appearance, you get better results. The article ended with a quote from Naomi Pierce. "A year ago, I was ready to leave this industry entirely. I didn't believe it was possible for a major financial firm to be both successful and ethical. Ethan Miles proved me wrong. But more importantly, he proved that the people being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated are often the ones with the most to offer. You just have to be willing to actually see them. Richard Hale and Gavin Trent were convicted of fraud and conspiracy. Richard received a 4-year prison sentence. Gavin received 6 years. Both lost their licenses, their reputations, and their fortunes to legal fees and restitution. Ethan's Aunt Catherine divorced Gavin and reconnected with her family. She now serves on the board of a nonprofit that helps people escape controlling relationships. And Ethan? He continued doing what he'd always done. Finding broken companies, fixing broken cultures, proving that business could be profitable and ethical. That power could be used to lift people up instead of keeping them down. But he never forgot the lesson of Northcrest Financial, the lesson that how we treat people when we think they don't matter reveals who we really are, and that sometimes the person in the hoodie, the person everyone dismisses, everyone ignores, everyone underestimates, is exactly the person who changes everything. Because justice doesn't care what you're wearing. Truth doesn't care what you look like. And power, real power, belongs to the people brave enough to use it for something bigger than themselves. Justice wears a hoodie. And sometimes the best way to see the truth is to stop looking at the surface and start looking at the soul.